Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bitcoin Latam Report podcast. Today, I have the pleasure to have Santiago Varela Belmont. Welcome, Santiago. This is the fifth episode, so I'm really happy to do it with you. We're also friends. We work together from La Casa de Satoshi, and we're going to talk about a really interesting subject today about the pension system in Mexico. So maybe can you please start by introducing yourself to the audience and maybe tell a little bit about your Bitcoin background so people have an idea of who you are and how are you involved in the Bitcoin space here in Mexico.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Maciej, for having me here in the Bitcoin Latam Report. It's an honor to be here with you, and I think it's going to be a very interesting chat about this very interesting topic and not so complex. I think that to this report with Aureo, we managed to bring it into an easy to understand topic so that anyone can understand why, as a Mexican, Bitcoin is a good savings alternative. In my background, I studied economics here in Mexico City, and actually, my graduation thesis was about the pension system in Mexico. In general, the saving system, trying to figure out why Mexicans save so little, if they do save, or maybe they don't even save in some places. So, kind of trying to figure out the question if Mexicans save, how much they do save, but more from an academic perspective. I chose this topic because I could touch on Bitcoin briefly, but in this all the academic requirements for a work like that didn't allow me to write just about Bitcoin. So I had to touch it from a different angle, and that's why I chose this topic. And yeah, I think that it's very interesting to see how the system is kind of fractured, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And my Bitcoin journey began in actually my days in college when I was studying economics, and I came to like it. And as you know, I am mostly focused in energy and Bitcoin mining. And that's what I spend most of my time in doing in the Bitcoin space. And yeah.
Yes, and you also main founder of La Casa de Satoshi, from which this podcast is being recorded. It's funny that you're saying that you were kind of limited by, the academic structure. You could not maybe shield Bitcoin 100% in your report. So we, Aureo, by working closely with you, we saw an opportunity to make this report, but actually tell the whole truth. So we were really happy that we were able to collaborate this way. So yeah, let's dive into it right away. So can you explain a little bit what's, just to start on a lighter note, what's the history of savings in Mexico in general? This goes back, centuries. People have been using some sort of money here in Mexico. So can you tell us a bit about the history of how people save and use money in Mexico?
Yeah, well, I think that the first surprising thing is that, as you already mentioned, that savings or the history of money and savings here in Mexico goes way back. Maybe when I was a little kid, my first impression, if you would have asked me what money is, I would have, or when was it created, I would have thought, well, the persons that write the bills and the coins that I see, that is the money. That is a kid's first impression of what money is from an innocent point of view. And you think, oh, well, Banco de Mexico, well, they are the ones that created. But no, actually, money and savings and all of this in Mexico began way back, way before the Aztecs. Since there was cavemen and all of this, it has just been evolving through time according to the technologies available in the different eras and civilizations in each time in this space of Mexico or America in general. So very back in the day, it used to be sometimes cacao, salt, things like obsidiana. I don't think there's another word to translate it.
Obsidian rock.
Yeah, obsidian rock. That was money in some time. It has just evolved in different forms in different towns according to the different cultures and the different technologies. And now we happen to have this money, this paper money that is not backed by anything, only trust in some institutions. And money wasn't always like that. There was even a time in this country in Mexico where there was free banking. So there were many different banks that had their own different paper currencies in different states of Mexico. Like, let's say, a bank in Chihuahua the bank in Mexico, the bank in Veracruz or in Merida, Yucatan. Different banks, different currencies, and maybe these currencies, some of them were backed by gold, and some of these maybe they're backed 60% by gold, some of them 50% by gold. But if we go deep into the details of all of that, you'll see that the history of money, banking, savings, all of this in Mexico is very old, and it's very interesting as well.
Yeah. Something I learned also quite recently, is that Mexico City used to be once like the financial center of the world, because the ocho de real, which was like the silver coin that was used basically everywhere in the world, was produced in Mexico City, minted in Mexico City. So it's crazy to see that Mexico City used to be once like the financial center of the world. So yeah, there's a lot of that happened. But as we approach like the 20th century, the Mexican state started to formalize itself a little bit, so probably slower than other countries. But that's when there was some sort of primitive ways where the government started creating pension plans for its citizens. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, so well, here in Mexico particularly, it was in the 40s, like in the 1940s, where the first formal pension or public savings plans began in Mexico. They were mostly program oriented to government workers, militaries, stuff like that. Not so general as we know them today, but they have evolved through time. That was in the 40s, but then Mexico has had two two particular years in which there have been reforms that changed significantly the course of the systems of savings in general, and more particularly the pension funds and the Afores as we know them in Mexico today, more modernly.
So yeah, in the report itself, you dive into it really deeply, but you basically identify like two big shifts: one in 97 and one in 2007. Can you tell like a small
Yeah, so
recap of what changed?
before in 97, this as I was describing it before, that it was not so general as we know them today. But there were more plans emerging. Most of these plans were we call it defined benefit, which is the problem. There are two types of pension systems. Some of them are defined benefit, and others are defined contribution. The defined contribution is the most recommended system, because in that one you fund your account each time, and then you put it in a savings account and it grows according to that. The other one, the defined benefit plan, is just a promise that you will get, when you retire in 2035, you will be getting this amount of money each year, no matter what, no matter how much you're contributing today. If you're contributing little, if you have a very big wage and are contributing a lot, etc., or if you are doing voluntary contributions, it doesn't care about that. It just promises you something in the future, and those are a huge. They do like a snowball effect, and it can be a black hole for government expenditure. So that is the one that is recommended to avoid. And before 97, all programs were of those kinds. So the government kind of, they saw the problem, international organizations and so on, they recommended you have to change to more of the defined contribution plan. So in 1997, they changed the system to mostly defined contribution plans, and they established the modern systems of saving in Mexico. We call it SAR. It stands for Sistema de Ahorro para el Retiro. And in that year, they also founded CONSAR, that is a commission for the systems of savings for retirement. And this commission like oversees the system, and they founded they found different private financial institutions that that participated in the licitation process to become Afores. Afores means that you can administer retirement funds for private sector workers. So the accounts in the Afores are for the persons that work in the private sector. The public sector has other different savings funds, which are tied to ISTE and IMSS, which are like the social security system. But ISTE stands for Trabajadores del Estado, and the other one is the Seguridad Social. So it's all more for like the public saving social security system. And that's how it became in 1997. And then in 2007, it's when we saw a little bit of more revival with defined benefit plans. Also, like since there were more to help marginalized communities in extreme poverty, there were minorities that were in disadvantages. So there, in 2007, there began to surge these plans that were, as I was saying, very niche, very identical for let's say, oh, there is this community that is very marginalized. They're all extremely poor and they don't have any way to get better in the near future. Let's help them. Okay, but for very particular cases like that. And since 2007 to, for example, let's say 2021, 2023, these same programs, they have been extended to now include all adults over 65 years or adults and this and that. So, and they increase the amount that they give out each year to each particular person in the programs. So they become like snowball effects. They just grow and grow, and they are promising more benefits and more benefits in the future, that money that they don't know they're going to actually have. So the question is where it's going to come from. And that is a little bit of what we also demonstrate in this report, that those kinds of programs need to be taken care of.
Right. So in the 2007 reform, they basically overpromised. They're promising a lot, but was there any also changes to make it a little bit more efficient? There's some kind of privatization. It was mostly based on offering more benefits without necessarily trying to make it work. How is there anything that they
Well,
changed
yeah,
also
no,
from that
there
perspective?
has of course been efforts to improve the system. For example, again, very recently, like there has been headlines that talk about how the Afores, they are going to be allowed to now invest more, let's say, more investments that have risk, unlike the traditional pension funds, which were known as the most conservative investors, that they were very restricted as to what things they could invest in. Well, today many Afores are talking about investing in infrastructures, in even in funds that are more like private equity and venture capital, so with more risk and even associated to smaller companies. So they're like opening up and talking about that. But that is not the main issue, this system, and that's, I think that was the main objective of this report that we wrote, and it is more than anything, unlike the academic report that I had written before. This report is kind of to challenge that traditional narrative that says that the problem with savings is mainly two reasons, and that's why all of this apparatus has to exist. And those two things are financial illiteracy and impatience. So since the individuals have those two things, we need to build all the system with the Afores and the defined benefit and the defined contribution systems and the private one, and all these complicated apparatus that some of the time, most of the time, I would say, some of the people with those savings accounts don't even know how that works. They don't know where to get their Afore money from. But we have to create all of these things to say, okay, we're actually solving for this solution. But when you analyze deeper and do more research, I think that you can see that the facts point to another problem, and that problem is actually fiat money in general. So on, it doesn't matter if you were asking me about trying to improve maybe these different aspects or do some regulations. Of course, there can be improvements to that system, and the system is gonna continue to exist. But that is not the solution. The solution is actually recognizing that the problem is in the fiat money, and that's why we're seeing this so-called debasement trade in in many places around the world, and investors beginning to identify with this idea of that debasement trade, because they are seeing what's happening with fiat money, and how this narrative is actually very easy to be challenged when you look at other arguments.
Yeah, right. So that was a bit of a spoiler alert. Of obviously, as Bitcoiners, we always identify like the nature of the money we use, fiat money, as like the source of all problems. So I totally agree with you. In the end, doesn't matter how well a pension fund is managed. you're always swimming against the current if you're saving in fiat currency. But I think like in order to convince people, you still have to like identify like the technical aspects of the system that are wrong. So, it's funny because today we're doing this podcast and the main news is basically talking about the pension system, saying that 1 in 6 pesos in the whole budget of Mexico is used in the pension system, right? But that's in 2025, but it will get worse
Of
in
course.
the coming years. So can you talk a bit about like some of the issues that will come up later, just from the perspective that exists?
Yeah, well, to get deeper into that, into the defined benefit ones that this paper is talking about, this is referring to the defined benefit plans that are financially unsustainable. And right below it, it's talking about demography. So these are two things that worries them. What we were explaining before with these defined benefit programs, they are promise you things in the future that they don't have today, and the way that they are able to pay when they have to pay those liabilities is that the money that they are gathering from the, let's say, younger population that is contributing and working, they use that money to finance all of the other liabilities. So it's like it's intergenerational financing. Yeah, you could see it in that sense. But this demographic problem, what worries them is that right now it's the first time in the history of humanity that population of older than 65 years is larger in number of population than the population of below 5 years. So this is talking to us about all of our civilization getting older in average. So the problem with that is that the number of liabilities and the number of retired people you have to pay things to is growing very quickly, while the people that actually fund those things in the present are not growing very much. They're very little in population now compared to what they used to be. So there's going to be a point where you cannot finance all of this. And that's why these two problems are undermined, and it worries them, and it's in the headlines of one of the most famous newspapers in Mexico. And this is not just an outlier that it was today. This is actually that a very common thing that you see people in the finance and business newspapers talk about this problem. So I think that they do it, and there has to be awareness raised about this. And I think it has been raised for many years, and it doesn't have to do literally anything with any particular political party. This is a phenomenon that has been existing for the past 10, 20 years in Mexico. And it's very difficult even to point fingers to anyone. It's just something that we have to acknowledge and, as you say, try to do improvements to it. So when we talk about doing improvements to that, I think that there are opportunities compared to when we look at other pension systems around the world. For example, here in Mexico, when we have voluntary contributions, it goes to the same Afore that you already have. But in other countries like United States, that it's our closest comparison, they have the 401k, but also the RIA. So not only they have like an Afore where they have a defined portfolio that Afore has, and they are subject to that performance and that IRR each year of that Afore that they have their funds with, their savings account. But they also have an account where they can do voluntary savings and choose where to put it. So there are options in the United States to put your RIA in Bitcoin. And some of these accounts they also have even a fiscal incentive. So they incentivize people to save that way. Whereas in Mexico, it's unfortunate to see that the numbers of voluntary contributions to the Afores are very few, almost none. And those that you do see are among the population that is or less financially literate, or those with less alternatives for other savings vehicles or alternative savings methods. So that tells us that they don't use that voluntary layer of the saving system, and there are ways to incentivize it more, as I'm illustrating with this example of the United States, and then even the Afores, as we already mentioned earlier in this conversation, that they have a lot of restrictions as to what they can invest in. Well, in the United States, we have already seen pension funds that have been allocating a responsible percentage of the portfolios to Bitcoin. They have been doing it through Bitcoin ETFs. So I mean, it's a step ahead. But even if we go now to, for example, to the UK, there are pension funds that have been doing it with MIC custody. So they are holding spot Bitcoin for the pension fund. So, and as I'm saying, it's a responsible percentage. They're not doing like crazy bets and putting 50% of a pension fund portfolio into Bitcoin. They're doing small percentages from 0.5 to 3%. But, these are good positive steps. And I think that in Mexico, these are some of the potential improvements we could also see in the system thanks to these new technologies.
Yeah, 100%. I think before the Mexican government allows Afores or pension plans to invest into Bitcoin, that's going to take a long time, I think. So as you said, there's way other steps or incentives to add in the existing pension system, at least to make it a little bit more attractive for savers, for families, for business owners. So just to also close on the talk we had at the point about demography problems. So Mexico still has a relatively young population if you compare it to European countries or Japan or this kind of countries where they already started their demographic decline many years ago. It's still going to increase significantly in the next let's say 25 years. The proportion of old people in retirement age is going to constantly grow. But I want to point out also that some countries are compensating for that with a higher productivity of the people that work that actually can contribute to the system. But here in Mexico, is this like, do you see like this growth happening of productivity? There's also a lot of informal work, informal economy in Mexico. How do you think that could be also be solved?
Yeah, well, the first part is that obviously we're not the same kind of population age that Japan, which is very famous for that problem. But still think that between Mexicans, we like just instinctive feel is that we can see it. Like you can see people are beginning to have kids older than their parents used to. Families used to have a lot of kids before, and Mexicans had a tradition of having very big families, like 5 to 10 plus kids. Many families, that is uncommon nowadays. Some people, they're like growing up and not even forming families, just having pets. Also, it's a growing phenomenon around the world, not just Mexico. So I think that we're still subject to that problem. That's also why it's there in the front of the newspaper, because they know it's an issue. And then the other part of the problem. What was the second question?
The productivity, like, and the informality of the economy here in Mexico.
Yeah, well,
50% of the people don't have formal work where they contribute to a pension plan. They receive their money in cash.
Yeah. That's one of the weaknesses of the system in general, that its lack of coverage, because Mexico has almost 50% of the informal economy, and that 50% of the informal economy is excluded from this public system for retirement savings. And I think that these people are just an example of why also alternative savings solutions are needed, because most of these people, they are just, I think that their culture has even adapted to the point as to where they know they're not going to be able to rely on a system like the formal public savings system that to save them in retirement. They know that it's going to depend more like on their families, on their children, they're having passive incomes, or even working and never retiring. That's a very popular phenomenon in the informal economy. You see people that they work until their last days. So they never retire because they always need to keep having the cash flow. So I think that is one of the reasons why they need to adopt different solutions. But in general, the system, although you mentioned that it's obviously very slow to, for example, get an Afore to put Bitcoin in to their portfolio, or get a solution like the ROI, etc. I do think that it's important for the people to, for example, knock on the door of their Afore or whenever they can, and ask them like, "Hey, when are you going to have this option? Like I want this," or in the civil society to ask for improvements to the system so that people have more voluntary savings. And this can be one of the channels. There can be investments in other, but that they in general try to incentivize more savings. So there can be different measures that I think if there would be also more ask of the people in these particular issues that sometimes people I think the main issues people feel like it's very complicated since the system is like very complex, but they feel like they don't understand it, but they should get more involved. And that's I think the objective also with writing this, so that they can see that it's something that with a little bit of effort and reading and stuff, you'll be able to understand it and try to do something about it.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that Mexicans are really using alternative option to save for retirement. I'm guessing it's probably different depending on the social class. So probably the uh, you know lower income class, the poorer people invest in a certain way, or maybe don't invest
Yeah,
really.
maybe they
Then you have
invest more
the
informally, like in lands or even in like family businesses and stuff like that. They're going to give them money on in a continual basis. So more like informal investments that are reachable to their environment. And then on the other side, as you mentioned, like the wealthier population, they use stock market and even angel investing. Some of them as more as their retirement savings. They do alternative investments in real estate, commercial real estate. Yeah, a lot of capital is flowing to other things, like more recently gold, obviously.
to other countries. I'm
Other
guessing.
countries, yeah, a lot of capital flows to probably to the United States, to Spain in the form of real estate, in the wealthy population, like buying properties in probably, I don't know, in Miami, in Madrid, stuff like that.
So do you think maybe like the actual Bitcoin adoption in Mexico could be driven first by these individuals that are really having a diversified portfolio, where they already have like this mentality of you have to, distribute
Yeah, I
your
think that
funds.
that's a good way to start. If you demonstrate, and we talked about this in the paper, that if you demonstrate to any of these kind of investors that you're describing with a diversified portfolio, and you integrate Bitcoin in a percentage of, let's say, 1, 5, or 10% into their portfolio, their Sharpe ratio, which is a measure that sees for every percentage of risk, of reward, of performance that you have, how much risk, how much volatility you have for that. Bitcoin is going to improve the Sharpe ratio of your portfolio because it's going to give you more return for every percentage of volatility. If you do it in these small percentages that I was mentioning. So to any of these kind of investors, that is an attractive thing. Obviously, to pension funds, they have diversified portfolios or 60/40 like portfolios that could be benefited of this kind of allocation. So yeah, it's I think that's a good opportunity, and I think that it's beyond the topic that we're discussing today. But a lot of investment in real estate is probably going to be demonetized in the form that it's going to be allocated in other stuff like gold and Bitcoin. Now that as we talked about the debasement trade before, I think that real estate in recent years has been really been seen more as an investment than as a purpose really is, as
It's
a
almost a
home
myth.
to live in.
Yeah.
It has been seen as more than that.
It's like
And
Trump that just passed a law. I don't know if you saw.
yeah, so large institutional investors cannot buy single family homes anymore. So yeah, that's a measure because that's happening, and actually, I mean, I'm not in favor of him forcing that, but I knew that that was going to happen even before him putting a measure to force that. So it was just people looking at the fiat world and saying, where can I allocate my money that it will be more in the future instead of keeping it in fiat.
Mhm.
And when they're waking up and saying, oh, yeah, everyone is now seeing the fiat thing, they're realizing that it's going into real estate and it's going to begin to go into sound assets like gold, Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's interesting subject. So, I think if you approach anyone in Mexico at this point, like the vast majority of people, like if you tell them you should use Bitcoin for your retirement, it doesn't depend on the social class. They probably will look at you like you're crazy. And not everyone has like the time to read the reports, such as the one we're publishing with you, the one that you wrote. So, and again, the report talks about fiat being the problem. So maybe first, as a way to orange peel everyone, how would you tell them about the problem of fiat and inflation? Like, how would you try to convince them that's the right solution and not pass for someone that's completely crazy?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I know it's kind of unfortunate that it's more seen as something speculative or as a casino instead of what we really see it. I see it as something for low time preference people. That is people that are willing to be more patient for the reward in the future than in instant gratification in the present. And it's the complete opposite of a speculative or a casino for me and for you. We see it in the complete opposite way. So it's kind of unfortunate to that people might see it that way. And in Mexico, it is something that does happen very frequently. But I think that the best way to explain it is try to keep it simple and say it's just savings technology. Why is it savings technology? Because it's completely scarce and nobody can create more of it. It's uncorruptible. It's unstoppable. It's similar to gold, but better than gold because you can move it to anywhere around the world. So we have like better properties and explain those properties, reasoning and try to do your best in that kind of way. But I think that it is hard for people to understand when you just try to tell them like, oh, it's money. Well, they're used to see money as something stable that is not volatile every 24 hours and it's going to change in value. So it's difficult trying to pitch it like we Bitcoiners try or already understand it because we are familiar with it. But I think we need to sell it more as savings technology. So it's very relevant in when we talk about the system for savings for retirement. It's relevant to talk about savings technology. That's why these two topics connect because I think that's the best way to sell it as just savings technology. It's scarce. It has these other properties like it cannot be corrupted. It cannot be taken from you. You can move it easily, blah, 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 etc. This other. And it's like, okay, I see a lot of benefits as to why this serves me. And you have to also try to understand different pain points for different people. Some of them, their pain points can be doing international payments.
Mhm.
So you have to also understand to adapt to those different situations because in Mexico, maybe also not all the people will be into Bitcoin for so much for savings, but more for payments. Maybe that's of more use to a lot of Mexicans. Well, we don't know. We have to see. But they haven't been familiarized with this technology either way, if it's either as a payment or as a means of saving. So we need to create more awareness and more education about it. Like it has been done with the calculator for inflation, with this document and more of these projects.
Yeah, the thing that Santiago is referring is we launched a website called inflacionmexico.com, where you can easily calculate how much purchasing power you lost over the years using the official inflation data from Banco of Mexico. And, I think this year was 3.7 in Mexico in 2025. So it doesn't look that big, but if you accumulate, it compounds right over the years. So just after 10 years, it can represent multiple dozens of percentage loss of your pesos. And everybody kind of can feel that, right? Everybody knows and feels everything is getting more and more expensive every year, every few months. So maybe by playing now with something like that, like something that people already feel and understand, that could be a way to do
Yeah,
it more effectively, I would say.
yeah, of course.
Um, Another more like personal question, because as Bitcoiners, we tend to be more libertarian. We don't want too much government intervention in people's life, in people's every country. But as you said before, like there is a chicken and egg problem with, well, Mexican don't have financial literacy. That's why we need to create this whole system to make sure they're gonna eat and be able to sleep somewhere when they're old. But because we do that, they're also not gonna get financially literate because they have like this paternalistic state that takes care of them, and they think it will take care of them forever. So how do you balance like the reality of like, yes, there is poverty, there is, people in the really that have needs, they don't have the means to have a, good way of life, versus like this Bitcoiner approach to like laissez-faire, the letting the private sector take over people like us, creating education, or companies like Aureo. How do you balance?
I think that as you say, that's the key word to balance it. So given that it exists and we're not going to do anything about it, let's just, and if you have a job and you're contributing to the system because it's defined contribution, you're part of it, and since you're a part of it, see how you can do it better. That's why we've been in this podcast, in this conversation, raising so much awareness as doing that, like a call to action. So you're a part of it, let's do something about it. What measures can be taken to improve it, and so on. Although you are a Bitcoin or libertarian, whatever you identify yourself with, but then on the other part, you need to know that you have to take that control, and there is something there that can make you be in control of the situation, no matter what happens. If you do get the results you want in the system, trying to take action and call for changes, etc. Or if you don't, you have a solution that you are going to rely as your primary mean. So I think that is the great thing in this savings technology. So as you say, it's a thing of balancing it and trying to push for the implementation of sound money on both parts, on the individual part and on the collective part through the pension funds.
Yeah, definitely. That's really great answer. We can work on multiple fronts, always offer, the full self-custody sovereign solution. You can always save Bitcoin in your own wallet.
And it's not for everyone, each solution. Maybe some people are not going to like the self-custody, so for them, the other solutions are better, exactly.
Or like a MIC solution for enterprise or high net worth individuals, so they don't risk losing it.
Exactly.
Then offering the possibility for Afores or pension funds to also invest. Is there any countries in the world that's already examples, like success story of some countries that already started doing it that could be replicated?
Well, in the US, in your IRA, you can invest in Bitcoin. There are some pension funds that have invested in Bitcoin in the States, like in Michigan or Wisconsin. In the UK, I think is the most notable example because they allocated, I think, almost up to 3%. Cartwright is the name of them. And they did it through the MIC that you mentioned. Yeah, I think I was listening actually to a podcast very recently of one called I think it's the Africa Bitcoin Corporation. Very interesting because they're Africa Bitcoin Corporation.
Okay.
But I think they're a publicly listed company in the Johannesburg stock exchange, and they're a Bitcoin company. They do like Bitcoin humanitarian work, but they also have a Bitcoin treasury, and many pension funds in the Johannesburg and African region invest in that stock to have exposure to Bitcoin. So there are like creative and notable examples around the world, if you look around, that have already done different interesting things. I would say Cartwright in the UK being the most notable.
Do you think, like, what's the ideal financial structure, in your opinion? Is like the Afores or the pension funds buying Bitcoin directly, or buying actions from treasury companies? Do you have any?
Yeah, well,
it's the best.
I think that the best obviously is to have many solutions, but if I maybe on an individual basis, what I would probably use more if it existed, it would be something like what they have in the States with the IRA, where it's a voluntary pillar of the formal system, and you have fiscal incentives in that account, and you can have optionality as to where you invest that money and how much you invest in what and when you take it out, etc. More freedom into your funds, and when you have the possibility of putting into Bitcoin, it's a great plus. And then since there's going to be the demand for them always, so like something like the Afores, or the pension funds, well, they need to have diversified portfolios. So integrate Bitcoin into those portfolios to improve their Sharpe ratios. Like both things need to be implemented, and also individuals on their ends to do Bitcoin as a personal savings. I think that trying to attack on all fronts, but maybe improving the voluntary pillar of Mexico would be something very some results that would be very dramatic and very illustrative also to the people of how little measures can have big results.
Definitely. So, we explain kind of like the limitation of the current Mexican pension system. We explain why fiat is bad. You explain your vision about Bitcoin being savings technology. I think one thing that we missed is like if somebody is like literally listening to this podcast for the first time, I probably not a lot of Mexican will listen to it. I hope so.
Hopefully.
So far the stats the podcast are showing most of the people are listening it in Mexico. So
Okay,
good
great.
news. But for someone that with by some miracle falls on this podcast and listens about Bitcoin for the first time, why Bitcoin for you is the right savings technology? Why is the right money for humanity, for Mexicans, for everybody? How would you wrap up this whole thing?
Yeah, I would say that Bitcoin is the best savings technology because I would say that scarcity is probably the main. I would tell them that is the most scarce thing ever, even more than gold, because you can know for a fact how scarce it is. Like there's not. Maybe there's one more Bitcoin after the 21 million. Try to search in the rocks if see if there's another one over there. Like you can have absolute certainty to the scarcity of it. It's uncorruptible because you can't change that. That 21 million is something that is set in stone. So that's another thing I would brag about as to why that is the best savings. And yeah, I'd say that probably also because there's an argument that I've seen people really fall for, and it's imagine that between the year 2100 and the year 2140, which are the last 40 years of the Bitcoin that will be mined according to the formula that was written in the code. It's going to take 40 years to produce just one Bitcoin. Probably today, $90,000 seems like a lot, but imagine that your grandchildren in that year 2110, something like that, has in his power one thing that is going to take 40 years to produce. Like imagine how scarce that is. Like that is the when you like really probably grasp like, oh no, this is very scarce. Like imagine that I have 40 years of production in my power. So that's like an interesting fact that I would like to leave your audience with.
Yeah, I think that's something everyone can understand. Scarcity in the world of abundance of information, of we're getting bombarded. So actually saying like this thing, there's only this much, and you can do nothing about it. I think that's probably one of the best message. Anything we miss from the report that you want to finish on, or
No,
maybe you want to tease some stuff we're already thinking about writing more about it.
I kind of gave a little bit of tips of what I'm thinking of, but yeah, I would just say also to thank you for the other team for working with me in this process of writing and editing and the publication. I think it came out as a great work. I hope that, as you said, many Mexicans are able to enjoy reading this and that they can see why they have probably already noticed it. Because I think that since we're little, many of us grew up and noticed that something was kind of wrong with the fiat system and that our colleagues didn't save enough and they were not having low time preference. So I hope that in this work that they can find like a good explanation as to those thoughts that I'm sure others might have had, like I did, and and hopefully this also makes a lot of people understand why Bitcoin is a good savings alternative and probably the best savings technology that humans have come across. and hopefully this is the first of many that we write between Aureo and myself.
Yeah, I believe we're gonna do it because I think it came out really good. It was written in Spanish first, so we really want to focus on the Mexican Latin American audience. There's a lot of graphic. There's a lot of explanation. So
You know
I
what
think
would
it
be
was
good?
really
We
good
should probably
quality.
even do a meetup here at La Casa Satoshi. We can someday do a meetup for the one-on-ones or something like that related on,
Like a readout or something
yeah,
like
like
that.
on the pension system and try to summarize it. Yeah, we could come up with something creative.
That's definitely a good idea. Yeah, and Santiago is here from La Casa de Satoshi, leading these initiatives we have here. A really great place. So I invite everyone that listens that if you pass by Mexico City, you can contact Santiago. There will be the links provided if you want to contact him, if you want to ask him any questions. And yeah, this is the La Casa de Satoshi, the house of Bitcoin here in Mexico. I think we really did a great job in the past year to really
Of
develop our
course.
community. And when this podcast will come out, we are actually going to have a meetup on a full day of workshops, of technical workshop on the 22nd of January. So this will come out after the report and before the meetup. So if anyone
Great.
listens, you can come to the meetup. The BitDevs is going to be a BitDevs. So yeah, that was it. I think. Thank you, Santiago. That
Thank
was
you for having me, man.
awesome. And see you next time. And
Until next time.
hope everybody reads the report and gives their feedback.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Perfect. See you.
Bye.